on my mind. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of The Boxing Show with me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. As always, I'd like to remind everybody to please like, comment and subscribe. Turn your notifications on for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, it is just the two of us this week. I am joined by none other than Mr. Andy Clarke, who managed to survive being at York Hall on a Friday night in the middle of summer. Andy, how are you? You're looking very svelte after a hot evening in Bethnal Green.
I loved it. It's one of my favourite venues anyway, for a number of reasons. It's really near where I live, which is another thing that makes it very, very convenient. But I like the heat. Midsummer nights at York Hall, you just got to embrace it and lean into it. You know that's what's going to happen when you go there. And if you're expecting anything else, or if you're going to try and wage some kind of futile campaign to remain cool and stuff your pockets with ice cubes or whatever, then you're wasting your time. You just need to accept the fact that that's how it is. And I don't really approve of boxing arenas with air conditioning, to be honest with you. Heating, fine, because you don't want to be freezing cold, but air conditioning, I just don't think there's any real need for it. That's just me. I haven't really moved into the 21st century. But it was a good night, yeah, I enjoyed it. And you could see that the fighters did feel it. And that was the only time I really referenced it, was you could see that they did. I was standing next to Isaac Chamberlain chatting to him for the post-fight interview when he sat down, and you can just see just bullets of sweat pouring out of him in a way that you don't normally see it. And Caroline Dubois, you could tell, had felt it, and Frazer as well, you could tell had felt it during his 10 rounds. So I think it was, for the fighters, it was good, because that was a test that you're not ordinarily going to have to endure, and it was a case of enduring it, I think, in the later rounds for most people.
Did you don the shorts? Were you like George Groves? Did George went for the shorts, or?
I can't go to work in shorts. I can't do that. Yeah, no, I know you can. Everybody is in shorts apart from me. I just can't. I don't know why. I was chatting to Lawrence Lustig about it at the event actually, and at York Hall, and he was the same. I just said, I see you. You've gone for the trousers as well, and he said, I can't go to work in shorts, and I'm the same. Even working on radio, even at tournaments, where it's been boiling, I could never wear shorts. I don't know why.
Well, we'll work on it. We're going to see Andy Clarke in shorts on the next episode of The Boxing Show. We'll get there. But right, we're going to start at the top and work our way down. There's a few cards to get through this weekend, albeit no major UK show, at least on Saturday night. But let's start on Friday at the piping hot York Hall for Frazer Clarke versus Mariusz Wach. I think everybody going in, Andy, or certainly everybody who'd kind of seen one of Mariusz Wach's prior 46 fights, could have expected, similar to what we got. Frazer Clarke, of course, pulled out from the purse bid, the high-profile withdrawal ahead of that bout, or the potential bout with Fabio Wardley, was put in with Mariusz Wach to get some rounds, and rounds he got.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever likely to be anything different to what we actually saw, and I was fine with that because it served the purpose that they wanted it for. I thought he was nice and purposeful. Stepped into the middle of the ring, looked sharp, looked to try and dominate things from the start without throwing bundles and bundles of punches. Doubled up, tripled up the jab. Kept things quite simple, basically. And boxed the 10 rounds at a decent enough pace. Wach wasn't hugely ambitious. He didn't just come to cover up. He did catch him with some punches, but he wasn't really... I don't think he was necessarily looking to win via any other method than just happening to catch him with something if Clarke got a bit reckless or gassed. He didn't really have a plan outside of that, did he?
He wasn't trying to win the rounds.
No, he wasn't trying to win the rounds, exactly. But he's a very experienced guy, and the fact that he comes in at 290 now, which is nearly 21 stone, I did just think to myself, but he carries it fine, and he's clever. I mentioned it a couple of times during the fight where it's just little things. They're in a clinch, or he's sort of they're not really on the ropes, but he'll just shift his weight forward into his toes and just lean on your opponent. And you've got 21 stone of dead weight on you. And it's just things like that just it just makes it difficult. And he's got that, weirdly, for somebody so big, he's got that kind of rubberiness almost when he gets hit. He rides punches pretty well. I wouldn't say he got hit full force that much. Maybe a couple of times when he was looking to open out himself, he got caught, but he never really blinked. But 10 rounds was what they wanted, and 10 rounds was what they got. And it was interesting to hear him talk at the end. I thought that was as honest an appraisal of what's been a difficult few weeks for him as you're ever likely to get.
It was kind of too honest, I think, in the little parts of it. I know we've had Barry in here and speaking in the past where Barry's spoken about Lawrence Coley, kind of, sometimes maybe you just don't be as brutally honest as you need to be, or as you were in that instance. And I feel like Frazer and Ben Shalom afterwards were potentially like that. But yeah, it was the type of fight that I think everybody expected, and he will. It's the old adage of, you learn more from that one fight than you do knocking out 5 or 6 tin cans. With respect to Frazer Clarke's opposition so far, it's not been the type of opposition that stands you in good stead for a Fabio Wardley or any kind of meaningful step up. But he got what he needed against Wach. I mean, Wach is, up until he boxed Arslanbek Makhmudov, who's I think number 6 with the WBC. Don't quote me on that. He's certainly ranked in the top 10, and he was given Makhmudov a decent fight through 6 rounds before he got caught with a big shot and put away. It's very, very rare that he ever gets stopped, as we know. It's something that we discussed on the preview show where,
and watching that, it didn't make me think that this was the start of a period in his career where that would become what happens.
No, absolutely not. And he's just so experienced. He's one of those guys, Wach, over the years. Not only has he had up to that point 46 fights, been the countless rounds of sparring, the countless camps that he's been in with your Vladimir Klitschko's and Alexander Povetkin and people like that, who he's also fought and lost to as well. It never really, for me at least, got the impression that Frazer Clarke was going to go in there and blow him out. And nobody's ever really done that to Mariusz Wach, which is kind of, I understand people want to see it. And it was unfortunate that Adam Azim was unfortunately not able to headline the bill. And I understand that people, want to see knockouts since the heavyweight division and, a headline. And it was a card that really went very long anyway. There wasn't very many stoppages, the heat or whatever you want to call it. I think there was some matchups that we'll talk about later. But people afterwards or even before the fight going, this is a waste of time. He's 43. He's lost 6 of his last 10 or whatever it was, 6 of his last 9. It's like, well, yeah, but that's Mariusz Wach, isn't it? It's what he's there for. And afterwards, I put a tweet out where I said, seemingly a lot of people never seen Mariusz Wach box before. I don't understand what people really expected to see Frazer Clarke in with. And I think the only time the earliest he's ever been stopped is in 6 rounds. At the end of 6, he was by Makhmudov, who was, of course, one of the maybe top 15 heavyweights in the world, depending on where you look and where your rankings are. But I thought Clarke, I think middle rounds he sort of started blowing a little bit, and again that will come from actually knowing that you've got to do 10 rounds in those middle rounds. Having if you're doing 6 rounds and you're starting to blow in 5, then you think, I've only got to do a round and a half. Whereas if it's a 10 rounder, you're blowing after 5 rounds, 6 rounds. You know that psychologically you've got to get back in there. You've got to do it. And I feel like he did that in patches in those middle rounds.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And if you box over 4, obviously, but also 6 rounds, the finishing tape is inside when you're on the start line. You can see it, can't you? It's just down there. And you might start to kind of feel your legs a bit over the last 20 metres of a sort of 100-metre dash, but you just get over the line. It's not a problem. But with a 10-rounder, it's different. It's just much, much longer, and you have to try and plot your way through it and navigate your way through it. And if he had an instance where Wach looked hurt, then that's something else to think about. Do I really put the hammer down now and try and finish him, which you would, but then you need the experience to kind of work out if he's not ready to go, and then you pull back. And there's all these sorts of things that you take into account. So you don't need a second wind in a 6-rounder, like you said there, but in a 10-rounder, on a night like that, you do, probably, if it's your first one. And it'll just be nice for him to know that it came, because he was looking pretty tired after 6-7 rounds, and we picked up on it. But then he finished nice and strong. So that's something, and that in itself is kind of a box ticked. It's like, okay, I've been into that situation where I'm beginning to run low on gas, but I've got some wind back in my sails. And by the end, if he'd had to do 2 more, say, for 12, he probably could have. I don't think it would have been a big issue. The guy out of everybody on the night who looked least tired and least bothered by those conditions was Mariusz Wach. And that's just a testament to his experience, isn't it, basically? And that's what he was there for. And like you say, I understand that people want to see knockouts. Everybody wants to see knockouts. It's the thing about boxing that makes it unlike anything else. But at the same time, the promoter has a job to do when it comes to progressing a fighter. It can't just be about what the boxing public want to see, which is generally knockouts, because that's not going to tick the boxes that they need to get ticked. So when you're watching fighters earlier in their career, this is the kind of thing that has to happen.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, you mentioned there about Mariusz Wach being the least affected by it. It's one of the things that he said before the fight, Frazer, you can be fit, you can be this, but unless you've done the rounds, and he's done, 10, 12 rounds, God knows how many times now, Mariusz Wach, and certainly in the gym over the years against elite, world champion heavyweights, you don't know that you can do it until you do it. And, as much as we want to see the Fabio Wardley fight and whoever you want to see Frazer Clarke with, unless they have a Mariusz Wach. And it's also worth noting that nobody's boxed Mariusz Wach after 6 fights as a professional as well.
No, exactly, yeah. And that's exactly. That's early days to be going up against someone like him. And so the idea that you're going to knock him out is pretty fanciful, to be honest with you. I mean, it can happen, obviously, because, these are heavyweights and they can all crack hard. But the chances of you catching someone like Wach with something he doesn't see, which is pretty much what you're going to have to do to switch his lights off, aren't good. And if he sees it, he's going to be able to take it.
He's so long, and it's just those little milliseconds where he can just ride the shot or just smother it a little bit. And that was what he was doing. Okay, so where next? It seemed as though in the post-fight interview, of course, they were talking about, it was the right thing, and we're glad that we listened to the knowledge of others and all that. It all sounds great, but it also kind of stopped short of saying, Fabio Wardley next. I know there was kind of the whole promoter hey-ho about, biggest offer, and we'll do that next. But it seemed to me, at least, that there's potentially, room for maybe one more before a Fabio Wardley. Or would you like to see him go straight into that if possible?
Well, I feel like having done what they've done, the way that it's gone, they may as well have another one, because I don't see how it would really work for you to go and fight Fabio Wardley next. I mean, I know how it could work. You make them a big offer, and if the board will give him a voluntary, then and they're happy with it, then it will happen. That's the process. But at the same time, it just all seems a bit odd, doesn't it? If that is the fight that happens next, and I don't see any reason why Frazer couldn't box again in. I haven't got any dates through for August or September, but I don't see any reason why he couldn't do one of them. And then if they wanted to try and get it done by the end of the year, then do that. I'd imagine David Adelaide would probably feel that he's next in line. He boxed recently. Solomon Dacres is English champion. It's got to be one of those two if they're going to make somebody mandatory. So, it's all. It gets a bit confusing for people, I think, because they don't maybe completely understand what happened with the purse bids and all of that. And some people, to be honest with you, don't really care that much why a fight isn't happening. They just want to know what is happening. And I can be a bit like that myself, because you just think, well, it's not happening, so I don't really need to know why it isn't happening. It's just the fact that it isn't that's annoying. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like he could sneak another one in now that they've kind of done what they've done? Or is it better just to go straight into it? I
think they could go straight into it, particularly with the
they want it. It's got to be on Sky for them now, hasn't it? So it's got to be a big offer.
That's the thing. And we have heard kind of murmurs about David Adelaide potentially being ordered by the British Boxing Board of Control next for Fabio Wardley. There are also rumours about Fabio Wardley boxing at the end of July. Not enough shows on the end of July. We're going to be in another May 27th night. But I think Wardley will box at the end of July versus somebody not Frazer Clarke. And then Clarke will, as you've said, probably box in August, September. And there's the opportunity to potentially do that by the end of the year. Will Boxer, Sky Sports, 258 management feel more confident now in Frazer Clarke boxing a Mariusz Wach? You'd have to say yes. He's done 10 rounds. He's boxed the guy who has operated at the top level, not beating everybody. He's not former unified champion or anything like that. But he is pretty much he's one of the last of a dying breed, particularly around that level and the heavyweight division.
And that's the problem, isn't it? It's like, who else is there? I was talking to Andy after the fight on Saturday, Andy Scott, and I said, what about the Hulk? And apparently the Hulk's quite expensive.
Yeah, Shevardzutsky.
Igor Shevardzutsky.
Who was, of course...
Box Bacoli.
Yeah, Bacoli boxed him in less than a couple of rounds, which, by the way, I mean...
That was impressive.
Very good, very good. I got put up on Twitter, Wach is very tough, doesn't get stopped very often, and then, of course, Billy Nelson, as if by magic, popped up underneath to remind us all of Martin Bacoli's Polish heavyweight title win. The lineal Polish heavyweight champion, Martin Bacoli, who stopped Wach and looked impressive doing it a few years back. But yeah, on Frazer Clarke, I think maybe somebody like a Christian Hammer, someone like that kind of fringe world level, still knows enough, but with respect, not threatening, not necessarily.
He's a good shout, actually.
Someone around that kind of level.
That would work.
You'd expect. But then again, it kind of goes on to Fabio Wardley. Who does Wardley box? They're kind of, Wardley's career, for me at least, from the outside looking in, is frustrating, because I feel like he's had some strange fights at strange times, and it's kind of not really given him that clear path of, this is what we're doing. Okay, we know your white collar experience, you've not got a huge amateur background at all. We're going to get you these fights. We're going to get you a Sokolovsky after 7 fights. We're going to get you a like we've seen here from Frazer Clarke. I mean, there's an argument now to say that, I mean, what would you consider a better win, Mariusz Wach or Nathan Gorman? Nathan Gorman's coming to win more than Mariusz Wach, but, he's not operated at anywhere near the same level as Wach, and you haven't got the rounds in, and there is still this question mark around Fabio Wardley with, that we didn't really get to see in the Michael Coffey fight on the Anthony Joshua undercard, but it's like, okay, 4 or 5 rounds in, it's looking like he's got some things to work out here. Oh no, the fight's over. And we've had instances like that when he boxed Eric Molina, had the very kind of dubious looking knockout win over Richard Lartey, and we've still not really had that kind of clear pathway for Wardley, who looks to still be on Matchroom's side of the fence. What happens with him in the future, I'm not really sure. But now it's kind of, you've got 2 fighters here where you, up to this point at least, I think we've still not really got enough information about either of them. But this past weekend, I do feel Frazer Clarke has kind of taken a big step towards understanding where he is, and against Mariusz Wach, you're going to find certain things out. Can you do the rounds? Can you deal with a big lump like that sticking his weight on you? Are you a big puncher? Can you get rid of somebody like that? It's not to say Frazer Clarke isn't, of course, for the reasons that we've discussed there, but I think Clarke, in theory, particularly how things have kind of played out in the whole Wardley saga, needing rounds, going the distance, could go into that next. Whether it, the timelines add up, and if Wardley's going to box in July, or the end of July, then Clarke's probably going to want to box at least once before the end of the year if he's going to get out in December. So maybe we see it in December. But again, it comes back to, what platform does that go on? Who's going to be... I think Boxer and Sky are more comfortable now, or would be more comfortable putting him in a fight knowing that he can, first of all, do the rounds and compete with a capable operator in Mariusz Wach. It's just whether or not we see it.
Yeah. I don't feel like Sky and Boxer... I mean, it's Boxer who pay the money, but obviously there's the relationship there. Having paid all that money for Frazer Clarke, I don't feel like they're going to want him to be boxing on DAZN. Like, that fight's going to have to happen on Sky. Eddie will have his own thoughts about that, as will Fabio. I totally agree about Fabio's career. It's not his fault, but he's had quite a few fights where it's been difficult to really take too much from them.
Nick Webb, like the Nick Webb fight, it's like, okay, this is good. Oh, Nick Webb looks like all the fights.
They've been strange, and you've not been able to really work out whether you've emerged from them any the wiser than you were before they started. And that's nothing to do with him. He's done everything that you could ask of him. But at the same time, that's just kind of how it's been. I was more convinced after the win against Nathan Gorman, but when we were discussing this potential matchup between him and Clarke before all of the shenanigans, if you quantified who was the more experienced of the two, it's Frazer Clarke by an absolute mile because of the international amateur career. And a lot of people who follow pro boxing can tend to kind of ignore the amateurs. They can be a bit, well, the pro game's the pro game kind of thing, can't they? But it does count. It really does count, because you're boxing very, very high level opposition. 10-point must scoring system, as it has been for 10 years. No head guards. So it does count. So in terms of experience, he's got a lot more. And now that he's got that 10-rounder, has Fabio done 10 rounds?
No.
I didn't think so.
No.
So, they are in that kind of position where, Friday night kind of gives Frazer a big step forward.
Wardley never been past 6. So he went 6 against Mariano Ruben Diaz Strunz. Our Italian contingent will be able to tell us what Strunz means. Not a very nice word in Italian. 6 rounds there, 5 rounds against Eric Molina. This is kind of because
we had some circulars that came out at the end of last week, didn't we? And there was nothing about the heavyweight division.
No.
And I just kind of wondered whether the board might have taken the opportunity, because Adelaide had boxed, the week before, to just kind of think, we'll just move this situation on and just slide him straight in. Yeah,
that was kind of the rumour mill, wasn't it? That we would see that. But if you look at Wardley's resume, Simon Vallily, good win at the time, certainly.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Richard Lartey, which kind of like Lartey got a couple of fights on the back of the Daniel Dubois performance. Like had that fraction of a second where he rocked Daniel Dubois. This is for me where it starts to get a bit strange. Is where you have Eric Molina, who, of course, former world title challenger.
Gave it a crack for 2 or 3 rounds, didn't he?
Yeah.
Or a round almost.
So, to be fair...
It looked like he did some damage.
Yeah, he hurt Wardley, and then Wardley came back and...
And then he pulled up the drawbridge, Eric, didn't he? Because he got to that point in his career where he'd started to do that.
Yeah, he has. He also had one with Hrgovic out in Saudi, if you remember.
Yeah.
And then this is where it starts to get a bit peculiar. So you have Molina, then you go down to box Nick Webb for the English title, then you get Daniel Martz, Chris Healy, and then up against Nathan Gorman. Daniel Martz, Chris Healy, you could argue Nick Webb should have been coming really before Eric Molina. Eric Molina should kind of go then Eric Molina, maybe even Nathan Gorman. Eric Molina, Nathan Gorman, Michael Coffey. But it's kind of like there's no...
Yeah,
it's a bit disjointed, isn't it?
I know exactly what you mean. And obviously he only had the 4 white-collar fights, so you're going to be concerned about getting him experience and getting him rounds. And so someone like a Sokolovsky, a tried and trusted kind of warhorse, would have been good. Nick Webb, but that was post Nick Webb's win against Eric Pfeiffer.
Yes. So I think it was the fight after that.
Yeah. So that, you've got to give him credit for beating Nick Webb the way that he did, because he was coming into it off the back of a big win. And that's how I've kind of been with him all the way through. I mean, most of it's been on Sky, so I've done quite a few of those fights. And you never want to look for reasons to just pick holes in somebody's record, because he has done everything that's been asked of him, but we still don't really feel like we know as much about him, and this is your point basically, as we should do probably by now.
Yeah, and it's almost now gone to I don't know how Team Wardley and Matchroom feel about it, but you'd kind of now look at his resume and think, okay, if we're going to do the Frazer Clarke fight, maybe we need 10 rounds. Maybe we need to see that he can go the 10, because if he's not gone past 6 at this point, do we get a situation whereby Fabio Wardley boxes a Mariusz Wach type, somebody like that at the end of July, if that's when he's going to box?
Because they can make that now, because the board haven't put a mandatory on him. He doesn't have to take a voluntary.
And if he stops
as champion.
And then you the age old, okay, well, this is how he did against him, this is how we're going to do against him. It's kind of tried and tested method, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see what happens there in the kind of the heavyweight fold, and whether or not we see that one next. Right, we're going to jump back and have a look at the rest of the card, starting off with the chief support at the weekend, which was Caroline Dubois versus Yanina Del Carmen Lescano. Caroline Dubois, another fighter who kind of bemoaned the heat and the conditions, and again you could really see it. But I thought a very, very competent performance from her against Lescano, who was of course former world title challenger, against Estelle Maselli, and Dubois pretty much did win every round and a knockdown for good measure.
Yeah, it was comprehensive, and with Lescano, I did her fight against Maselli in Dubai, and she ran her really close. It was. I thought Maselli just about did enough, but it was. I wouldn't have been shocked if Lescano had got it on the cards. I don't think anybody could have screamed about that if it had happened. And Maselli's not top level. She's not where Taylor is, or where Serrano is, or where Chantal Cameron or Alicia Baumgartner. Those fighters in and around lightweight. She's not any of them. She's below that, but she's an Olympic champion, a world amateur champion, and she's a good fighter. And Lezcano gave her real problems. And Caroline Dubois shut her out. So if you're going to use that kind of yardstick to measure the performance, then it was an impressive performance. Lezcano never looked in any particular trouble. She got put down. At the time, I wondered whether it was a legit knockdown or not. The right hand she got hurt to the body, then got clipped with a nice right hand, and the left hand landed enough when I saw the replay, I think, to feel like, yeah, that was fair enough. But she won kind of pretty much every second of the fight against someone who, top 15, you'd probably say. So that gives you an indication of where she already is. So all this talk about Mikaela Mayer, I think, is fair enough. I wouldn't really have too many. I wouldn't worry about putting her in with Mikaela Mayer now. Certainly, I'm not saying she definitely win. Everybody's. I wouldn't say getting on a bandwagon, because I think everybody's believed in Dubois from the beginning, but it's not a given that she would beat Mikaela Mayer, because I think Mikaela Mayer would be sitting there just thinking, hang on a second, what's happened here? I'm a unified champion at super feather. I'm moving up to lightweight. I want to fight Katie Taylor, not you. But if you get the feeling that Mikaela Mayer would probably take it if the money was right, if Taylor's not gettable, which she wouldn't be if she's going to rematch Chantal Cameron.
Yeah, and it's kind of I think a lot of, certainly the Sky card on Friday, the Boxer card on Friday, is a lot about, I do feel like there was some decent step ups. Aaron McKenna, who we're going to come on to talk to next. Caroline Dubois, okay, it's not the same as the men's code. I think we always try and keep it 100, Andy, as the kids say nowadays.
There's not the depth. There's not the same depth,
And she has blazed that trail, hasn't she? She's gone through people. Yeah,
and once you take care of someone like Lezcano, and as outlined, we do know where she is in the kind of pecking order. Once it would be harsh on Lezcano to describe it as being like a spar, because because it wasn't. It was very competitive, but at the same time, she didn't win a round, Lezcano, and she didn't really come close to winning a round. And that means that the next step up is to fight for a world title. Obviously, the situation's complicated because Taylor's got them all, and she's always been very diligent with her mandatories and kept all those belts together. If she rematches Cameron at super lightweight, then those belts might fragment, because as much as the sanctioning bodies love her, they might say to Katie, you're kind of holding things up a bit here. Everybody knows you're the number one at lightweight. If you want to, you can box for these belts like that again when you come back down, but can we just that could happen. Or she might just not be that bothered about letting some of them go now if she gets mandatories put on her that she's obviously not going to want at this stage. So there could be a bit of fragmenting, so there could be some belts available, who knows. But that is the next step, to fight for world titles for Dubois, or at that level, whether it's an interim title or whatever it is.
Yeah, and kind of sort of talking about the difference between the men's and the women's, I don't think Frazer Clarke on the back of a 10-round win over Mariusz Wach means he's ready to fight for a world title. But going on kind of where Lezcano has been, and the way that Caroline dealt with her, and again, it shows the kind of the difference in the depths. You've got one who's now kind of apparently ready to box for a British title in Frazer Clarke, and somebody in Caroline Dubois.
That is the perfect illustration, isn't it, of the difference between the two.
Well, if you get rounds in with somebody who's been at world level at some point, don't need to be successful as Mariusz Wach has been in the women's code, you could be kind of ready to go or thereabouts. But I guess the point is they're both the same exercise, but with a different outcome because of the depth and because of the stand in the respective codes. But Dubois, I mean, she didn't get the stoppage, which I know that she would have been keen to get, but she did pretty much everything else. And I agree with you. I don't think it was quite the sparring session. It had a different intensity than a sparring session would, albeit perhaps not the same intensity as it would have if it had not been, a packed, boiling hot York Hall on a Friday. If it's not Mikaela Mayer next, does she need to, potentially go into a 10-rounder, maybe again box in August or a September, and then after that just see where the land lies at lightweight?
Yeah, I guess so. And in that case, I think they would probably look for a kind of former Katie Taylor opponent who took Taylor down the stretch. So you're looking at someone like Miriam Gutierrez, maybe, who she's a kind of fighter who isn't going to be getting better offers than the one she would get from boxer to fight Dubois. Tough. I think she boxed it kind of like March time. I just don't see any reason why she wouldn't want the fight. I don't, and I think Dubois would win 10-0. So you might think, how worthwhile is that? It's 10 rounds, isn't it? And if she could stop her, then that would be great. But it would be the kind of one where, a bit like Frazer, you're kind of just thinking, right, you're definitely booking in for a long job here. Like, you could stop her, but it's going to require some patience and some gears, which is, that's what you want to see tested. Or I was thinking Katharina Thanders. She's boxed in the UK, her last few fights. She's a Wasserman fighter. That could be a decent option. But it'd be something like that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, you would think so. Because, as you say, it's quite interesting now. We get into sort of, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in recent memory, I think this is the first sort of log jam type situation we've had in the female code. I mean, we're unfortunately very, very experienced and accustomed to it in the men's code, with belts being kind of, held up, and there are reasons for it.
Yeah.
And
any latest on that Taylor Cameron situation?
Not that I've seen, no. I mean, I know Chantel Cameron was talking about wanting to go to 135. I wonder if we get into a similar kind of Canelo Bivol situation whereby Cameron wants to do it for something that Katie Taylor's not really willing to budge on. You'd think the competitive nature of Katie Taylor would want that rematch to happen at some point, whether it's at 135 or 140. But I'm none the wiser, Andy. I'm not too sure as to whatever, what movement there is on Taylor versus Cameron versus Taylor too, of course, after the first fight. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, and it's probably not the worst thing in the world either. If this was another, let's say, a year down the line with regards to Taylor and Cameron, and there were belts vacant, and maybe Dubois would have been thrown in potentially a little bit earlier. So I don't think time is on her side.
Oh yeah,
which may not be what fans of the sport, or people who are tuning in, want to hear all the time. But it is similar to Frazer Clarke. You don't get a Frazer Clarke versus a Fabio Wardley or whoever without a Frazer Clarke versus Mariusz Wach.
Yeah.
Same for Caroline Dubois. You don't get a Caroline Dubois versus Michaela Mayer without a Caroline Dubois against a Lezcano or a Miriam Gutierrez. So the fights will happen, but it's nice to see on those specifically those two, that there seems to be kind of a clear path now. Whereas before, certainly for Frazer Clarke, I mean, you've had, and he has been unfortunate, he had a hand injury, he had people dropping out at last minute, but the facts of the matter are the opponents that he's faced so far have not been the most stimulating for somebody of his experience and his standing in the amateur game moving forward. Now there's something to work off. There's something, okay, we've seen this, okay, we can take something from that. And it is kind of, it's cliche, but he will have taken more from that on Friday night than he would have done in his previous 6 bouts to that point. Final one that we're going to discuss from this weekend. Actually, we're going to talk about 2 more, but the next one we're going to talk about is a very good fight. I thought fight of the night versus Aaron McKenna and Usman Lima. Just like to preface this with all of you insiders who told me to bet on Lima because he was going to get the stoppage. You all owe me money. Gamble responsibly as always. But Aaron McKenna, wasn't given to him against Lima. Had some things to figure out in there. And again, I kind of feel like we're kind of going back over for each fight at the minute, which, again, as we've discussed on Frazer Clarke and Caroline Dubois, for the paying public and for the people watching at home, you want to see knockouts, you want to see kind of rock'em sock'em affairs. I think this is probably the closest that we got to that the weekend, but still a good solid 10 rounds for somebody in Aaron McKenna who didn't have that under his belt really beforehand. And he did well and won a pretty clear but competitive decision over Lima.
Yeah. When the cards came out, it was one of those ones where you just think those cards are right. Probably, I don't have any argument with them, but it's a good example of where the cards don't really tell the story of the fight, because quite a lot of those 10 rounds, I would say McKenna won them 60-40. If you want to talk about percentages, 10-60-40s is 10-0, and that's just how boxing scored. So it can be harsh. I really enjoyed it. I thought Lima was great. He took it at relatively short notice. I'd been told as well to look out for him. I thought there were times in the second half where he looked like he was going to come apart at the seams because he was feeling it, and you could see that he was, but he just always managed to come back with something. He's very, very tough. He took some good shots from McKenna, never really looked like he was in too much trouble, and he posed some serious questions. And that would have been... It was kind of perfect for McKenna, to be honest, because he had a long stretch out in America. He's got a very interesting backstory. I won't go into all of it now, but he did loads of work over there with Freddie Roach, Robert Garcia, a ton of really good sparring. He was with Golden Boy, had a number of fights. Robert Diaz, a matchmaker, always does a good job. Came back to this side of the Atlantic and things were slow. He's not been that active and he's been looking for an opportunity. And he is the kind of person where if you're above him in the rankings, you're not going to be mad keen, to be honest with you, because he is a right handful. It was just a very enjoyable fight to watch. I thoroughly enjoyed it, really did. And they're quite a kind of... They're a fun kind of crew, the McKennas, the dad and the two boys. They are pretty intense, but not all of the time. But they do just love it. You can see how much they love it, and he loves it. And they don't love it because he loves it. It was in them from the beginning. And the fact that in the build-up, it did make me laugh. They did this little feature called Meet the McKennas on Sky, and Fergal was somehow trying to claim that I never guided them down this boxing path. They chose it. And you just think, Fergal, you built a massive gym in the garden, right?
They didn't have to go in there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, look, what's that? Oh, no, what is that? But they're fun. They're good to be around. So he's a good addition. But Lima, yeah, hats off to him too. Well, a first defeat, but his stock grew massively.
Yeah, and a first defeat, but something that, he again has something to build off now. He boxed on Sky, and, he's, I think afterwards managed by Lee Eaton. Lee Eaton said, he's really a 154, and maybe could even one day do 147. Don't know about 147, but certainly 154. Doesn't really have the frame for, Aaron McKenna, who's boxed up at super middleweight and, well, actually technically above. But yeah, I thought it was a good performance from him. And Aaron McKenna, because even in the middle rounds there, where Lima he was investing to the body really well with the left hand, and he was just occasionally in those middle rounds sort of started to bring it up, and you saw both of them at different times really struggle with the pace, the intensity, the heat, whatever you want to call it. And Lima, I think in rounds 8 and 9, he looked like he could potentially go. And the lessons that he'll learn from that, and on the flip side from McKenna, where it looks like you've got somebody going, but he's managed to tough in there. I think it's a fight that really sort of served a lot of purposes on both sides of the card. It did,
yeah. And that's what I really liked about it, because you get to the end of a fight like that and you just think that was great, because that's really worked for the pair of them there. Like they'll both move forward in their careers from this. Loads of positives to take. And I like fights like that because, this is a sport. We talk about business a lot, but this is a sport. And when you see a really good contest between two committed, dedicated fighters, both of whom are now going to have a positive outcome, I love that, because you have to kind of, people need to look at Lima and anyone who takes a fight at relatively short notice. Firstly, they're able to, because they stay in shape. All right, it might be a bit above where you would like to be, but that's fine, because you've been out of the gym and you don't want to cut too much too late just to make it for the opportunity. So that's the lesson there. You need to stay ready, as people say. Not everybody does, but you definitely do need to. And then just embrace the experience and just get in there and do your absolute best. It sounds really, really basic, but no one can ever ask for any more than that. And if you do that and acquit yourself well, then I'm pretty sure we're going to see him again soon. It might not be on Sky, but it could be on DAZN. It could be with, my point is, it could be with anybody. Some people might be a bit wary of him, but he was really, really good, I thought. And for McKenna, it was 10 really, really valuable rounds.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing about Lima. I do expect to see him at some point, sometime soon. We've got a lot of 154s in this country, as we know. So we could see him on another card in Britain very soon. And finally, from Friday at York Hall, we saw Viddal Riley get a repeat stoppage win over Anis Taj, although in slightly more conclusive circumstances this time around. I thought he boxed largely, apart from one shot in the fourth round, I thought he boxed pretty well, Viddal Riley, this weekend.
Yeah, I did too. I think he was zeroed in for this one in a way that he probably hasn't been for any of his pro fights so far, because I don't think they really anticipated having to do this again. But then when options were presented to them, it probably was the best one, because they knew that in Taj he was someone who was again going to try and give it to him. It would be an interesting build-up and create a little bit of a stir that way, which he did. But he just demonstrated that he's on a different level. Anish Taj. He was a solid fighter. You know, he's a good amateur himself, and certainly doesn't lack any self-belief. But the first 3 rounds, I thought he boxed really, really well, Viddal. First half of the 4th round, Anish Taj got some encouragement, which had been kind of lacking up until that point. But then the finish was impressive. I mean, he'll look back on it with a bit of regret, I think, Anish, because he's kind of looking at the referee complaining when he got hit by the left hook, which he'd been hit by a right hand, which hurt him or looked like it did, and then he was wasn't even looking. He was looking at the referee to complain about a low blow, and they weren't low blows. They were bang on the belt line, and you know the referee will tell you beforehand, you know, where is fine and where's not. Sometimes they'll say nothing below the top of the belt. Other times they'll say the belt line is fine. And generally with referees, the belt line is fine. I mean, it's quite unusual for them to draw the line at the top of the belt, isn't it? And he put him away, and I thought he could maybe have stopped it there and then, but Anish Taj would have gone mental if he stopped it there and then. But he did give him a long time to recover the referee. Yeah,
he did. Kind of walked and stopped it. Then we could have seen Riley Taj 3. So so it was probably best for it in the end. But yeah, he kind of took him to one side, had a real good look at him. But I mean, the fight was over.
I think he started talking to him about the low blows. That's why he took him to the corner to have another chat. But he probably got like 15 seconds at least there, Anish, and then as soon as he started to land, the towel came in, and so did and the referee stopped it too. So I'm not criticising. Is Mark Bates, I think. I'm not criticising him. It's something I'm looking into in kind of a lot of detail at the minute. And when he got put down, he wasn't out. He was backwards to me, but from the way he then went down, you could tell that he was in the room. He knew what was happening, but he was hurt. Yeah,
it was a heavy knockdown at left hook, and just as well the subsequent left uppercut with him on the ropes missed. Because I don't think he would have been carrying on after that one. Just final one on Viddal Riley. Cruiserweight is thriving in this country. He's always been very kind of. He's great. I know you would have spoken to him in the past, Viddal Riley. He's great to speak to. He's got good head on his shoulders, and consider like where he's been in his career and kind of the whole influencer thing and Mayweather and all of that stuff. Seems to have a very good grasp of who he is, where he is, and where he wants to go. And he's always stopped short of saying, I want the react pause. And Chris Billam-Smith, who of course is the WBO Cruiserweight champion, he has a win over him in the ABAs. So he does have the seasoning. He does have, he is. In if you put somebody else's brain in there, he could be calling for those fights. He could be trying to kind of get into that stage now where he's going to be probably looking around British title level or English title level, certainly. How far do you think he is away from joining the, maybe not the world level guys in Riakporhe, Ricoli, etc., but your Chev Clarks and your people like that who are all kind of hovering around the British title level?
I don't think he's too far behind them. I know his plan is to box for the English title by the end of the year, and actually that got boxed for on Saturday night between Nick Parper and Jamie Smith. I don't know the result. I forgot to look it up. Get busy. But that's what he wants to do before the end of the year. And I like that because that is a good next step. That is what you want to do. Isaac Chamberlain, Mikhail Lawal, we understand, is going to happen for the British title. He's not there yet. I wouldn't say he's there yet. Chev Clarke, I thought, looked really good in his last fight. So, he's ahead of him too. But he will look to climb that ladder, and that's why it's wise to go and win something like an English title, because that then it gets you on that ladder quite literally. And even if you then can't really make the next step up straight away, you'll be in a championship fight against a challenger who is absolutely dreaming of taking from you what you've got, and it just gets you into that mindset quickly, and that's a good thing. That's a really good thing about the British Boxing Board of Control system, area title, national title, British title, is that quickly you get into a situation where you're in proper championship fights and you're in with people who really want to win.
And I think that's part and parcel of why we saw good performance from Viddal Riley this past weekend. And I felt like the first fight that they'd had with Anish Taj was competitive, but I think as you've mentioned there, I think it may have been the first time in Viddal Riley's career where he's gone, oh, actually, this guy's here to win. He's not just here to kind of play his part and take me some rounds. He actually is keen to win. But anyway, moving on, let's go to New Orleans. And Andy, I know that you, like me, spent yesterday on Sunday, on the Lord's Day, watching Regis Prograis versus Danielito Zorrilla. Not too many times, I don't think we could say it in the career of Rougarou, but a pretty drab affair in New Orleans, albeit one where he did retain the WBC super lightweight title by split decision.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It wasn't really what I was expecting, to be honest, and I put that mainly down to the way that Zorrilla boxed. That's not really what I've seen from him previously. And I kind of felt for Prograis a bit because, yeah, I'm not one of these people who feels like you should give rounds to someone for coming forward and trying to make the fight and all the rest of it. But Zorrilla, I did find pretty negative in the way that he did it. He kind of used the periphery of the ring. He was waiting for Prograis always, really, from what I saw, to commit and try and make the running. I just felt like Prograis, I don't know whether he went into that fight a bit underwhelmed by it all and just felt like he was going to win it comfortably, but it maybe had that kind of vibe because it looked like he just felt like he was on a different level to Zorrilla and that he wouldn't really be able to test him, and for that reason didn't really work hard enough at closing that gap and getting to him. He just felt like he could maybe walk forward and at some point it would happen. It just had that overall kind of feel to it for me, really.
It was a strange one, and it's sort of the curious case of Regis Prograis, really, since that WBSS, and we spoke about it numerous instances in the past about him kind of not being, being an avoided man and people not being desperate to jump into the ring with him. And of course, he was with Probellum, which made things a bit difficult. He's now signed with DAZN, who have got some play at 140 pounds, but it is in that level that's slightly below world championship material in your Richardson Hitchens and Montana Love and Stevie Spark, Valenzuela, people like that. But it was almost, I agree with what you said there. I think he kind of would have expected to win, and he did win the fight. But I think in the first round, he got clipped by a right hand, and I think maybe that was a little bit of, that's not supposed to happen. I know it potentially should have been scored or knocked down. It wasn't. And after then, I just felt like he struggled a little bit with the movement and cutting the ring off. And I did feel, I don't know, master after the fact on a Monday, I did feel earlier in the week that he looked tight at the weight. And he's been making 140 for a while now, and I felt like he did look quite drawn, and it just felt like he lacked a little bit of that zip that we've seen from Regis Prograis in the past. I mean, he's getting on now. He's into his mid-30s. He's certainly not old, and by all accounts, I believe he looks after himself pretty well, but it is still making that weight, and against somebody
and he's not been that active either, has he?
Exactly.
And I think that's a bad thing as you get older. You don't want to be fighting 5 times a year as you get older, because the sustained pressure on your body probably won't take it. But I do feel like, if anything, you want to stay as busy as you can, and make that weight as often as is kind of feasible, because I don't think it does you any favours if you're out the ring for too long. No, and I think stylistically the difference between Zorrilla and certainly Liam Parro, I was quite excited by the Parro fight, because Parro's a nice, neat boxer. I don't think he would have moved anywhere near as much as what we saw at the weekend, and I felt like that would have been good. And then there was the talks of Arnold Barboza, who of course was at Top Rank. I couldn't see that fight happening after Prograis essentially turned Top Rank down to go with Matchroom. I couldn't see Uncle Bob just handing him over. No, there you go, no problem. So it's not the ideal kind of build-up, but it feels like we've sort of said this about Prograis now for a little while. And it is frustrating because he is so talented, and when he's on, he's so good. And 140 pounds at the minute is so exciting with the 135s coming up. Of course, Lopez's, the retired Teofimo Lopez's performance over against Josh Taylor a couple of weeks back. And it just felt like this was an opportunity for Prograis to really kind of stake a claim at 140 pounds and potentially entice people. It may do it on the kind of the other side of the fence, with people looking at it and going, oh, well, I quite fancy that now. He can't box that way against me. But you wanted him to go there and make a statement and really kind of kickstart this next stage of his career. And he didn't quite do that, did he? No, he didn't. He definitely didn't do that. It was an underwhelming experience watching it. Yeah, he did. Exactly. He struggled to cut off the ring, and he's against someone as well who, taller though he was, doesn't really box his height. I couldn't, watching it, I couldn't I couldn't quite work out why he was struggling so much to cut off the ring and kind of step to Zorrilla a bit more. And it did just feel like he thought at some point I'm going to catch him with something, a big single basically. He didn't really throw too many combinations, didn't really throw any kind of like 5s or 6s that I can really remember, which might occupy your opponent, distract them at the very least, and then maybe you've got a... If you throw a 5 or a 6, maybe you've got a better chance of landing punch number 5 or 6 off the back of the first 4. He didn't really kind of do any of that. And it is wide open, that division, when you look at it now. I mean, off the back of the other week, you feel like it's wide open for Teofimo Lopez to just dominate if he's going to come back and box again, which I'd imagine he probably will. But yeah, it probably was a missed opportunity for Prograis. Like Lopez, maybe he's more of a big game player, and he needs a big occasion to really get the juices flowing and get the best out of him. Yeah, potentially.
I did feel that his kind of inability to cut the ring off, and I felt like he was starting his attacks from too far out as well. The jab is often a throwaway punch for somebody like him who wants to get in and get his big power shots off, but he was kind of using it to close the distance, but starting from too far away, and by the time he'd kind of double jab to get inside, Zorrilla was already out, and he wasn't able to... He never really had prolonged periods of success, like where he was able to pin Zorrilla down.
No, he very rarely got him where he wanted him, did he? That was his issue.
So it's gonna be interesting to see where he goes next. Devin Haney's still to make his intentions known. I think I've seen stuff recently about him potentially staying down at 135 pounds.
Well, I saw something from Bob Arum over the weekend talking about Haney Lomachenko too.
Yeah, sign me up. I'd watch that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, would Haney do that again?
I think
it's a big fight, isn't it?
This is what Arum said. Arum said, that somebody had relayed Haney's kind of response to it essentially, and he'd said that if the money's right, I'll do that fight. And Arum said, well, he sounds very smart, because why wouldn't you? Yeah. And if you're top rank, you're looking at it going, okay, we can get another payday out of Lomachenko. Yeah. And then that's only if he provided he might win the fight. I think we both scored the first fight for him. If Lomachenko comes up short in a similar vein, he's still there for a Shakur Stevenson. They're very, very wily cats over there at top rank. So I think that's a fight that makes a lot of sense. You've also still got Shakur Stevenson down there. Devin Haney. Gervonta Davis is still 135 pounds, and who knows what he decides to do next. But I think if he comes calling and the money's right, why would Haney not? Haney's not attached at the minute. But Haney would probably look at that weekend's performance from Regis Prograis and go, if you struggle to cut the ring off against him, Haney, who's somebody I think he's going to take to 140 pounds very well. I think his body will respond to it brilliantly. He'll probably look at that and think, yeah, I'll go out there and beat Regis Prograis, no problem. How much you paying, Eddie? And they have that relationship whereby he could go and do that. I guess now we've seen Regis Prograis in action this past weekend. I will go back to you on one of the topics that we had last week, which is just seeing how that 140 pound land lies. How do you see them stacking up now?
I mean, I probably haven't really changed my mind, particularly when it comes to the rankings, because you've got to put Lopez at number 1. The way I do it, you got to put Taylor at 2 because he was at 1 and he's lost a fight against somebody really good. So, and then I would stick with Prograis at 3. I think that's how I had it last week. And then I think I put Haney in at 4, and then I was umming and ahhing, and it would either have been Matias or Ramirez even. But it's not. Yeah, it's funny how things kind of evolve and change, isn't it? Because if you look at the identity of the champions at the minute, there's 4 different ones for a start, off the back of having an undisputed champion not that long ago. But there's people to come into the mix, or who we feel like are going to come into the mix, who could kind of change that completely. So it's in a state of flux, I would say, that division at the minute. And I'm still a believer in Prograis. But my theory that he needs the big occasion to really get him going kind of needs to be true, I think.
How about Regis Prograis versus Jack Catterall? Do anything for you?
Yeah, it does, actually. They've had a bit of back and forth, haven't they? And Catterall, you could argue that he should be in that top 5. You could have a strong argument he should be in that top 5. Because we all felt that he beat Taylor. But I do have to take into account actual results. Maybe I do it a bit more than other people, because otherwise things can descend into what for me would be a bit too much chaos.
They already have enough chaos as it is.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we do have enough chaos. But yeah, and Catterall deserves another big fight. You don't always get what you deserve, but he does deserve one.
Who would you lean towards in that fight if that was made next?
I might quite fancy Catterall in that fight, because he is very patient, and he is a clever fighter. And I liked what I saw from him in his last fight. It's been very frustrating for him, but I think temperament-wise, I think one of his main strengths, Catterall, is exactly that. It's his temperament. And I think he might be able to get under Prograis' skin a little bit and maybe make him fight the wrong fight. I think he's capable of doing that. And I just wonder whether Prograis might not fancy it kind of for that reason, feeling like Catterall might be a difficult person for him to deal with more mentally.
I lean towards Catterall in that, very, very marginally, but I will say this, and it's probably not what, certainly Sam Jones and etc. want to hear. I don't think that's the greatest fight in the world.
No, I don't either.
I think stylistically...
And that's why I think Prograis probably won't want it.
Yeah, because you see what Prograis struggled with this past weekend. You just see Catterall just slowing the pace down like he's so good at doing, and that becoming... And my granddad used to say to me, is the only thing worse than one southpaw in the ring is two southpaws in the ring.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work out that way, but
Catterall's power is his poison.
Yeah, and it's just able to slow the pace down. His ability
to do that is why people won't really want to fight him.
And you just feel like with Prograis seemingly struggling for gears this weekend, which is I feel like what we really saw.
I don't know what Jack's rankings are like, but if
I'm sure they can work
outside of Lopez, just whether he's close to mandatory with anyone, because outside of Lopez, I don't see why Catterall couldn't beat any of the other three.
He's certainly in the
mix. They won't want to fight him, but I don't see. I could see him beating the other three. I think he'd beat Romero all day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
All day, every day.
I'm trying to talk Luke Campbell out of coming back out of retirement to fight Rolly Romero.
Oh yeah. He's still in that. He probably hasn't got to the end of that 2-year stretch yet, has he, Luke? Where you need to stay away. I saw him in Bournemouth. He looked great.
Yeah,
I thought he looked great.
Yeah, he did.
He looked like a film star.
He just come back from Vegas, and that's when it started. He walked past Rolly Romero after they fought, and he looked at him and he thought, I beat you.
Yeah.
He is number 6 with the WBC, Jack Catterall. So ahead of him, and you just start looking at the political side of things. Ahead of him, you've got Ramirez and Barboza, and again, for the reasons we've mentioned about the top rank, you can't imagine them. They obviously want to box for a world title, but offering certainly Ramirez, who's a big ticket seller as well, up to Prograis to go and box on DAZN. Can't really see that happening. Antoine Russell, PBC fighter. You'd think that if he's going to be boxing for a world title, that'd be Rolly Romero or somebody of that ilk. So. Josh Taylor, by all accounts, going to be moving up to 147. Sandor Martin, who's not, I don't think is attached to a promoter. He might be attached to one of the Spanish promoters.
Yeah, I don't think he's attached to what we would describe as a major promoter.
No, with respect. But yeah, Sandor Martin, I think, again, you're probably looking at that if you're Prograis and you match him and you go, yeah, probably not. Like that sort of Prograis versus Sandor Martin is another one where you've got two.
No, you don't want him for Prograis.
No, on the back of that performance especially. Because that's a banana skin for him as well.
I saw Prograis in Dubai last March and he cut down Tyrone McKenna and looked great. But that's exactly the kind of fighter that Prograis is going to look great against. Someone who's aggressive and is going to,
leave plenty of holes as well.
Is going to bring it to you.
Yeah, whereas Sandor Martin
is not that guy. Jack Catterall is not that guy. Those are the kinds of ones. If you're guiding Prograis, you're not gonna want them for him, really, are you?
No, and it's going to be interesting. You've got Richardson Hitchens versus Montana Love, so potentially the winner of that. But you'd think whoever wins that is, not quite ready, not quite there yet. I think do the Catterall fight. As much as that might be a difficult one to stay awake for, with respect, I think it would be a high-level fight.
It would be a high-level fight, definitely. I think it'd be one of those ones where the likes of us would find it absorbing. It would be a good watch. And there has to be room for them. Like I said before, this is a sport. It's not just about making fights where it's going to get the biggest ratings and the most social media views and all the rest of it. Although we understand that that's important, of course, but this is a sport, and if you're going to have two really good fighters getting in the ring with each other, you can never guarantee what kind of spectacle you're going to get with anything, with any competitive sport. But we still do have to have that. It can't just always be about who sells the most tickets.
Absolutely. And then, of course, finally, £140, there is Subriel Matias, who you mentioned there. I don't see anybody queuing up to fight him, with good reason, I think, as well. Very, very dangerous man. And another one who's on the PBC side of things, so you could maybe see Gary Antoine Russell, could see a bout between him and Kenneth Sims. You never know. But anyway, moving on, and finally from this last weekend, and it's one that's not going to take us too long to review. Tim Tszyu with a spectacular first round knockout win over Carlos Ocampo. Ocampo, we've seen in the past at £147, he got wiped out in a round by Errol Spence, but since then sort of responded well and rebounded well, went the distance against Sebastian Fundora, but he was blown away in spectacular fashion this past weekend by Tim Tszyu, a man who seemingly with every fight, Andy, looks to be getting better and better and better.
Yeah, I wasn't that sold on him, to be honest, until recently. I think I just had the kind of scepticism you some have about Sons of. I don't think I was really that fair on him, maybe, because I did a couple of his fights really early on. I guess they might have been on Joseph Parker undercards or something like that. I can't quite remember what it was, and I remember doing notes for him. I'm not sure if the actual fight made it onto the broadcast, and it could also be a bit of snobbery because he's based down in Australia and there isn't the kind of strength there in depth that there is here, and I just wasn't really having it, and not for any proper reasons, that's my bad, but he really has turned into something, to the point where people are even talking about him maybe being better than his dad, and that, there's a long way to go on that front.
Yeah,
but at the same time, very rarely does that happen, does it? No one's ever really talked about Eubank Jr. being better than his dad. Certainly I've never heard anyone say it, even me.
Certainly not you.
But yeah, he's good to watch. He kind of ticks every box, really. And obviously he's got that profile because of his father, which is a massive help.
But you have to do something with it. And, it has been more of a kind of a steady route in recent times, especially. But I feel like his last couple of fights, in particular the Tony Harrison fight, because the Tony Harrison fight was the fight that I'd always kind of looked at for
Harrison.
him. Yeah.
I've always really liked him.
And he's still got plenty left. He outboxed Sergio Garcia with real ease.
Yeah.
And that was a fight where I looked at that for Harrison thinking, at the stage of your career, Garcia is, good. He's a proper European champion, proper European level.
Yeah.
We've spoke about this in the past. And he's going to get on the inside and he's going to make it horrible and he's going to make it uncomfortable. And for Harrison at that stage of his career, you'd probably not look at those sorts of fights, albeit a couple of years earlier, and what proved to be on the night is sort of tailor-made for him. And Tszyu really sort of set about Harrison. Harrison had some success, moderate success in the early rounds, and then got sort of beaten up a little bit. We've seen Fundora lost to Brian Mendoza in pretty spectacular fashion, and £154, albeit with an undisputed champion. That kind of little bridge beneath it now. I feel like Tszyu has really separated himself from the pack. I feel like against Harrison he was excellent, and this past weekend I expected Ocampo to go a few rounds. I didn't expect him to go the distance. I felt like Tszyu would probably chop him down somewhere around the middle rounds, maybe 6, 7, 8, sort of that sort of territory. But he is progressing really, really well. And that fight with Jermell Charlo now, compared to where it was when it was first announced, it was due to have already happened in June of this year, and we've had injuries and delays.
You felt like it was a bit of a formality, didn't you?
Yeah,
I did anyway.
I did. And then now it's like, actually, the more the time goes and the more fights, and Tszyu's not having, stay busy fights, really. They're fights where he's taking stuff from and he's learning from them, which I think is credit and testament to his mentality. That fight with Jermell Charlo now becomes a lot more of an even fight. It's more of a pick'em now than it certainly was when it was first announced to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. And with Charlo as well, we were talking about activity earlier on, and as you get older, I think not boxing often does become more of a problem. I mean, over at PBC, it does seem to be a bit of a thing that people don't really box that much, or at least it can materialise that way. You look at Gary Russell, like it was a standing joke, wasn't it? Like his annual fight. And he did well with it because he kept winning until he didn't. But he would have made good money. And I think overall, that's a good career. But at the same time, wouldn't it have been better if he boxed twice a year? he might well have won all of them, and then he's made twice as much. And it's not, with the Charlos, I just feel like I just don't really know. It's strange.
And also gives you the opportunity with those with fighters who aren't as active. Gives the opportunity for one night for them to go in the ring and go, oh, actually, he's not what I remember him to be, which is, I think, what happened when Gary Russell, I know he had the shoulder injury, but when he boxed Mark Magsayo, where it's like you'd think that kind of a Russell of a couple of years before then, maybe a bit fresher and a bit more active. I know he had issues outside the ring with his father, who was very unwell. I think he passed away. But you kind of got in there one night and it's like, okay, now the one fight every 14 or 15 months is potentially starting to catch up with you. And I think that's why, I mean, pound for pound lists, as we know, Andy, are, 10% fancy and 90% bollocks, I think. But Jermell Charlo in recent years, I mean, he's an undisputed champion. He's won those fights by knockout. He's 154 pounds, albeit, while it's still predominantly PBC dominated division, there've been good fighters in there. He didn't win, didn't become undisputed champion by knocking over a bunch of stiffs. There were good fighters that he beat.
That's definitely true.
But when you see these pound for pound lists, Jermell Charlo is not really, certainly not represented as well as some. I'm sure himself would want him to be. And I do feel it is because of the inactivity, and he's not. I mean, it's probably worth pointing out that this is significantly his longest time out of the ring, and there's for good reason. He's had a hand injury, but again, when you get to we kind of alluded to it earlier with Katie Taylor, you get to the log jam stage because he's got all the belts, and then all of a sudden mandatories start piling up. It does become quite frustrating, not just for him but for the division as well. If that fight can happen next, how do you see that playing out?
I mean, I'd still make Charlo favourite. I think you'd have to, but at the same time, I would give Tszyu. I would certainly give him a decent chance, and much more of a chance than I would have done previously. And the way that has kind of changed over that period of time, it's like watching a horse come up on the rail. You've got someone quite a long way out in front, and it looks like it's basically over. And then all of a sudden, they might be running out of track. I feel like Charlo probably would win the fight, but that it wouldn't be easy. And yeah. That analogy kind of stands. He's got someone really on the charge there who I think he would still have enough to kind of fend him off. But at the same time, I do want to see it now. I wasn't that interested in it before, as we just said, but I definitely do want to see it now. And the activity thing, we touched on it earlier, it is strange boxing, whereby for business reasons, once you become big, your activity rate slows down pretty much when you're at what people would reckon to be your physical peak, the peak of your powers, and then you go to twice a year. With someone like Charlo, not even twice a year. With Russell, as we said, once a year. Because of COVID recently, that's factored in for some other people. Josh Taylor boxed 5 times in 4 years. Anthony Joshua, roughly the same. And Canelo's the only one who's bucked the trend when he cleaned out super middleweight, but now he's back to twice a year. And I understand the toll on your body that camps take and all that kind of stuff, but it's just, I can't quite work out why nobody has figured out that is not a good thing. But I guess it's the business side. Big fights are hard to make. Yeah,
I mean, you kind of get to that sort of important money-making era.
Yeah, and you box in May and September.
But if you can kind of push ahead of that, you get to that where you go, okay, when Mayweather was active, you could plan your holidays around when he was going to box. He was always going to box May, September. Canelo, when Canelo's kind of the chief cash cow in the sport, he's always going to box Cinco de Mayo, Mexican Independence Weekend in September as well. Whereas for the kind of just the rung just below that, where you're elite, you're world class, and I do think Jermell Charlo is an elite fighter. I think his win over Brian Castagno, I think, was one of the more underrated performances of the year. I thought he boxed with a discipline that I wasn't really sure he was capable of, particularly after the first fight where Castagno was just able to rush him a little bit and was just able to kind of implement his own game plan. I had Castagno winning the first fight.
He closed the book on it, didn't he?
Yeah, it was very, very clinical performance. He didn't allow Castagno to really... He won a couple of rounds, but they were close-cut rounds where not much happened, whereas Charlo really rubber-stamped that and really closed the door on Brian Castagno, and it was a really impressive performance. But yeah, I think going back to kind of the original question really of the fight, Charlo and Tszyu, I think it's a much closer fight now, and it's one where I would give Tszyu a real chance in. I would give him a real chance in. The one kind of thing that, and look, boxing, if you go swimming, you're going to get wet. Terrell Gaucher caught Tim Tszyu with a good right hand in the first round of their fight and dropped him. Charlo's a much bigger puncher, devastating puncher, really. If you look at his kind of punch stats, I mean, I don't have them to hand, but him and Wilder, and you're always kind of wary of the low output, high knockout percentage fighters and the way that they're able to do that. Gervonta Davis is another one where he's just lining you up, and that was the Castagna rematch where he just lined him up and lined him up and lined him up, and in the 10th round he let the left hook go, and then that was it. So that would be kind of the big thing that still, you know, is you got dropped in a fight, it happens, it's boxing. But Charlo is that elite level puncher. And Tszyu, while doing a lot of things well on the front foot, he is there to be hit. He's not, you know, defensively he's not a Pernell Whitaker. He's not somebody who's going to sort of dance and make you miss and make you pay. He's an attritional, wear you down fighter. And just with how Charlo has boxed and how he's dealt with pressure fighters in the past, Castagna being the obvious one in the rematch, I'd probably give him the edge in that fight. But it's one that I'd really, really like to see now.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to make him favourite. And I think it's right that he would be. And, you know, if I had to put any sizable amount of money on it, then I would pick him, because the resume is with him, basically. What's happened in real life so far is with him. Tszyu is still more potential than proven at that kind of level, obviously, but it doesn't mean that he can't make the step up. And when is that actually going to happen, do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what Jermell Charlo's his kind of rehabilitation timeline is, whether he's going to, I mean, you would assume he has to go straight into it. You know, it's been announced previously, it is mandatory. He's the WBO interim champion now, Tim Tszyu. So it would be a case of that happening next. It's just whether or not Jermell Charlo, or when Jermell Charlo is going to be fit for it. But you would hope that it can happen before the end of the year. And if you're Tim Tszyu and you think, okay, well, if it's going to happen in December, you can get another one in. Well, he just won by first round knockout. He could box next month if he wanted to. Yeah. But getting a fight in August and September against another kind of Fedora Mendoza rematch in, if he were to box I don't know, 155 Erickson Lubin or somebody like that, you'd again, and he goes in and beats Erickson Lubin, he stops him after 6 or 7 rounds without looking, you know, without getting hurt, then again you would kind of, the pendulum would swing a little bit more towards Tim Tszyu, which what makes the fight so interesting. You've got the established champion who does have a few question marks about the inactivity, the hand injury, and Tim Tszyu, who 12 months ago, 18 months ago, some people, not myself, but some people looked at kind of as a bit of a gimmick, and you never really know what you're going to get with the sons of, as you've mentioned. But now I think it's fair to say that he is definitely, you know, stepping away from the shadow. Whether or not he becomes, you know, pound for pound number one, as Costa Tszyu was at one point, remains to be seen. So I think people potentially need to slow their horses on that one. But that's a fight that I'd really, really like to see. Right, before we wrap things up, we do have a few cards to look forward to this weekend. And we're gonna dedicate our time to just one of them, which is the return of Edgar Berlanga in New York against Jason Quigley. Berlanga, of course, in his first fight now under Matchroom Boxing. There's been a lot of talk about Canelo and a lot of talk about this. Of course, we kind of knew him coming through as this first round KO king. He has since kind of hit a bit of resistance in some of his fights since then, but still an unbeaten fighter, good talker, very marketable. And while we have a lot of time for Jason Quigley here at Boxing News, it is a fight where you would expect him to look good in this weekend in Madison Square Garden. That's the idea, isn't it? Yeah. That's why this fight's been made. I do find what's happened with Berlanga kind of interesting, because he had that long run of first round stoppages, and then Top Rank obviously thought to themselves, okay, this is great, because some of those guys were supposed to give you rounds and they couldn't. Well done, well done you. But then they did get him some fights where he got some rounds, and it didn't go exactly according to plan, did it? No. On one occasion particularly. And the fact that they seemed happy to let him go, Top Rank, I was surprised by it, and I found it kind of interesting. Yeah, because we mentioned this earlier, didn't we? They don't get much wrong. No, they really don't. Over there at Top Rank. And I know that they had kind of big plans for him as Xander Zayas doing a big Puerto Rican night in New York and really
lighting that flame again, because it hasn't been lit, has it, since
Cotto?
Yeah. So that I know that they really wanted to do that, and they could kind of like co-headline those two and really just get that rolling again, because they were that. That's what you're always looking at, isn't it? Puerto Rican fighters. Orlando's a good place for them as well. There's a big population down there. I remember covering Cotto's fight against Delvin Rodriguez, and they took him to Orlando, which at the time people couldn't believe they were taking him away from Madison Square Garden, but it really worked out. So the fact that they were happy to let him go just immediately just made me wonder.
Yeah, I mean, he had the big knockout streak, and then boxed somebody who was the second best nickname in boxing, Demond De Best At It Nicholson. That's a great nickname. So behind Juan Lezcano, the Hispanic causing panic.
He's
that's
still number one. He can't be beaten.
He's the Sugar Ray Robinson of boxing nicknames. No matter what you do, you're never going to get past him. So just give it up, all you nickname hunters out there. But since then, Demond De Best At It Nicholson went the distance. The fight that I think you're referring to is the Caceres fight, who of course we know from his bout with Billy Joe Saunders. He's in all sorts of trouble in that fight. He was dropped heavy in the 9th round, was beaten up really at points of that, and got a decision, but in a fight where that was one where that really showed it's not just doing the rounds. It's similar to what we talked about earlier with Frazer Clarke and Caroline Dubois. If Frazer Clarke ends up on the deck a couple of times by Marius Wach, but still wins by 10-round unanimous decision, you take what you can from it, but there's some serious red flags there, which is I think what we saw in Edgar Berlanga. Then Steve Rolls, that was a competitive fight. I remember watching that one in the wee hours of the morning. And then Roma Angulo as well, another competitive fight, all of which went the distance. So he kind of needs to get back on that, monster Puerto Rican knockout machine. And
I wonder where his confidence is at.
That's probably what he needs. He needs what he needs to hit someone and have him go over.
I think he does, because it's really interesting when someone has that kind of streak, and then you get in with a few people who stand up to him. And I did hear a few things after that fight against Caceres that maybe there seemed to be a bit of entitlement there with him. Maybe that almost like, if I hit you, you should just go down and stay down. That's the arrangement here, isn't it? I did hear that he didn't react to it that well, possibly attitude wise. Because if you go from a run of first round stoppages and then all of a sudden everyone's taking you the distance, that can shake your confidence.
It's what we've spoken about. A large part of this show today is us talking about matching and the importance of matching and getting the right fights at the right times. And Fabio Wardley's done this, and Frazer Clarke's done this. It is so important.
It's absolutely. It really is. And also, I think it's probably quite hard training a fighter when they're cleaning everybody out. I remember talking to Russ Anber about when he was training David Lemieux, and he said he was constantly telling him it's not always going to be like this, and he could tell that kind of bit by bit, like he was losing him, like he just wasn't. He started to believe that it would always be like this. He describes it as puncher's disease, and it's a thing, and if you can't, I understand why a fighter would invest in that and start believing it and get high on their own supply. I get it. But then when it's proven to you, when you're shown that it's not always going to be like this, then that's the point at which you have to kind of sit on your stool in the dressing room, look up at your trainer and say, yeah, all right, you were right. React to it in the right way. And I'm not necessarily sure he did. So I'm kind of intrigued to see what we're going to get from him from now on.
Do you give Jason Quigley much chance of the upset?
I'll give him a chance, because he's a good, tidy fighter. He's well organised. He's very capable. He's boxed at a good level. He's not really a big puncher. But at the same time, if he can frustrate Berlanga, and Berlanga again goes in there with a kind of seek and destroy, now I really absolutely must get a stoppage this time because it's his first fight with Tszyu. I need to impress. He could go completely off at the deep end in the wrong way, thinking, I must get a stoppage, I've got to get back to being Berlanga the banger, and that is all that matters, and that's forefront of his mind. Then Quigley could beat him, because, the old cliche, the more you go looking for it, the less it's likely to happen. You can blow a gasket, and then things can go wrong. So he does have a chance. It would be more down to Berlanga getting it wrong, I think. Or rather, I feel like he'll need Berlanga to get it wrong to get the win, but I don't rule that out.
Yeah, I think the early rounds are so important. So important. I mean, we saw Quigley go and really not do himself proud to do himself justice against Demetrius Andrade. I know there was issues, and Andy Lee couldn't make it out, and Demetrius Andrade is a good fighter. Losing to Demetrius Andrade is not, it's not the end of the world. Being stopped by him in a couple of rounds is not ideal, particularly when Andrade's not known to be a big puncher. Berlanga can punch, whatever his technical limitations are, his mental fragilities, or whatever you want to talk about. He's a very strapping young man.
He's got to be ready for that, hasn't he? He's got to.
But if
he can ride that out.
If he can't get to Quigley early, and Quigley, very good amateur. He's up now at 168 pounds, which, you never know. I mean, on the surface of things, you don't like that, him moving up in weight against somebody who's a big 168, but you never know. He's at the stage of his career where it may have been a bit tougher to make 160. He might get a little bit of an extra lease of life. He might be able to take a shot a little bit better than he was against Demetrius Andrade. But Quigley will have to frustrate him. I just think it's a...
Hopefully he should be going into this in a kind of nice and relaxed frame of mind, Jason, because he's coming towards the tail end now, and there's no real pressure on him, and I just feel like there's probably a lot on Berlanga, or at least I feel like he'll have put a lot on himself for this fight. I think this is a massive night for him.
He's auditioning for Canelo, isn't he? As seemingly everyone.
I find the idea that he would fight Canelo pretty hilarious, to be honest. I think it's absolutely absurd, if I'm brutally honest.
It's nowhere near what I would consider to be a competitive fight.
No, it's just not even a remotely acceptable match for the Canelo, is it?
No.
In any way, shape or form.
And who knows what's going to happen with Canelo? He's talking about fighting Badu Jack at 180 pounds with a rehydration. Who knows how...
Badu Jack said that he's not having any of that.
Yeah.
Nor should he.
No, absolutely. Jamal Charlo apparently is kind of in the hot seat as well, potentially lined up. It gets to that very boring stage of the year where we have the Canelo rat race and who's going to get the Canelo fight. Kind of anybody from 147 pounds in Errol Spence right the way up to Alexander Usyk at heavyweight has been mentioned for Canelo at some point in the last 12 months.
You should get in there with Mariusz Wach.
There we go. That's what we should do. Like, Canelo should test the waters at heavyweight.
Give away £100.
10 rounds
£100 plus, and get in there with someone who's not that far off, twice as heavy as him.
10 rounds with Mariusz Wach at York Hall.
Yeah,
we'll do that next. But yeah, it is a tough night's work for Jason Quigley. If he can just survive those first 3 rounds, make him frustrated, then strange things can happen.
Yeah, you really don't. You never know, because he could get anxious. Berlanga. He's at a very, very interesting stage of his career. Really interesting, and he will be having doubts about his own power, about the one thing that he never had any doubt about, that he was unshakable belief in. I might watch that. I might step and watch that, actually. I wasn't intending to, but I might.
There's a few fights on this weekend, which we don't unfortunately have an awful lot of time to discuss on today's episode of The Boxing Show, but just check out boxing news across all social media platforms and boxingnewsonline.net if you want to catch up with this weekend's boxing. But from me, Rob Tebbutt, and from Mr. Andy Clarke, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks very much for stopping by here at The Boxing Show. Let us know who you think wins this weekend from Edgar Berlanga versus Jason Quigley, and what you thought of last weekend's action. Who's the number one at 140 pounds? Is Tim Tszyu ready to take on the throne in Jermell Charlo? But thanks very much, as always, for stopping by, and we'll catch up with you next time.